Tonight, we're asking a question that sounds simple but leads straight into one of the strangest corners of natural history. Why were dinosaurs so big? Not just big, either. Some dinosaurs were bigger than a bus, longer than a tennis court, heavier than a small whale, and they did all of this while walking on land. On legs, without collapsing into a pile of broken bones and regret. And that raises a truly uncomfortable question. How did Earth even allow this? Was it food, oxygen, climate, evolution, or could something deeper be hiding in plain sight? Because when you look at the giants of the Mesozoic, it can feel like nature didn't just push the limits, it rewrote the limits entirely, and then added a few zeros for good measure. Almost everything we think we know about dinosaurs comes from what I'm going to call the boomer dinosaurs, the adults, the giants, the old veterans of their species, the ones that lived long enough to grow huge, leave more bones behind, and dominate our museums, our textbooks, and our imagination. But what if the boomer dinosaurs are the wrong place to start? What if the secrets of dinosaur gigantism are hiding in the young? That's where we're headed. But first, we need to explore the theories people have offered for decades. The mainstream ones, the fringe ones, and the "wait, somebody actually published this" ones. Some of them are going to sound completely crazy, because every time we think we've solved dinosaur size, the dinosaurs get bigger. So let's begin with the first theory, and it starts with a question that sounds like science fiction. The Fringe Brigade, when the internet rewrites physics. Before we get to the good stuff, the actual science, we need to address the elephant in the room. Or rather, the shrinking planet in the room. Because if you spend any time on the internet looking up dinosaur mysteries, you will absolutely inevitably run into a collection of theories that all share one thing in common. They require Earth itself to have been fundamentally different during the age of dinosaurs. Lower gravity, denser atmosphere, a closer moon, a faster spinning planet. A planet that was literally smaller and then expanded like a balloon over millions of years. These ideas pop up everywhere. YouTube comments, Reddit threads. That one uncle at Thanksgiving who's really into alternative science. And look, I get the appeal. If dinosaurs seem impossible under current physics, maybe the physics were different. But they weren't, and we need to get this out of the way now, because these theories keep circulating and they keep sounding plausible to people who haven't looked at the actual evidence. So let's speed run through them, knock them down, and then get to the genuinely fascinating stuff. Theory 1, the expanding Earth, or geology's flat Earth moment. This is the big one. The expanding Earth hypothesis. You've probably seen the videos. A globe starts small, continents fitted together like puzzle pieces, and then the planet expands, pulling the continents apart like cracking paint on a balloon. It looks neat. It looks like a solution. It looks like maybe, just maybe, somebody figured out the secret that mainstream science refuses to acknowledge. Except this theory is thoroughly debunked pseudoscience, not controversial, not alternative, not suppressed by big geology, debunked, as in we checked and it doesn't work. The logic goes like this. If Earth was smaller in the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous, then gravity would be lower. And if gravity was lower, then huge animals could move more easily. Their bones wouldn't need to support as much weight. Falling would be less dangerous. Even those strange tiny arms on some species might make more sense. It's a tidy explanation. Unfortunately, it's wrong. Gravity depends on Earth's mass and radius. To reduce gravity by a meaningful amount, you need a big change in mass or radius. And if Earth's radius changed dramatically in the last few 100 million years, the planet's geology would be screaming about it. We would see clear global signals in rock layers, ocean basins, heat flow, and crust formation. What we actually see is a planet that fits extremely well with plate tectonics, seafloor spreading, and mantle convection. Plate tectonics explains more than just coastlines. It explains seafloor patterns, magnetic striping, earthquake belts, mountain building, why new ocean crust is young, and why old ocean crust gets subducted. The expanding Earth model is visually compelling, but it loses badly when you test it against the full dataset. Satellite geodesy measurements show no detectable expansion. The gravitational constant has been measured with incredible precision, and it's not changing at rates that would matter. And perhaps most damningly, the theory violates basic principles of mass conservation. So no, Earth wasn't smaller, gravity wasn't weaker, and we need to stop pretending this is a legitimate debate. It's not. The expanding Earth hypothesis is geology's flat Earth moment. It's a fascinating historical footnote about how pseudoscience can look convincing if you only show one piece of the puzzle. Moving on. Theory 2. Denser atmosphere, or dinosaurs in soup. If the planet itself didn't change, maybe the air did. This idea is sneakier because it doesn't need gravity itself to change. It only needs dinosaurs to experience less mechanical stress. Imagine air that's thicker, denser, heavier. A world where you push your hand through the air and it resists you. A world where falling feels slower, running feels cushioned, and even a big body feels just a little less punishing to carry. Could that be the answer? It's tempting because we know atmospheres change over time. Oxygen levels have shifted. Carbon dioxide levels have shifted. The climate regime of Earth has moved through different phases, and we already have deep-time examples of animals getting big when conditions shift. Insects in the Paleozoic, for instance, big dragonfly-like forms, large arthropods. It feels like a clue, but here's where the physics gets in the way. To make a multi-ton dinosaur meaningfully buoyant in air, you'd need atmospheric pressure several times higher than Earth's current pressure. We're talking about air thick enough to swim through, air so dense it would fundamentally change the climate, the heat distribution, and the entire character of the planet. And the evidence we have does not support a Venus-like dinosaur world. Methods that constrain ancient air density and pressure give us boundaries, and those boundaries don't allow for the extreme densities this theory needs. Now, could a moderately denser, more humid atmosphere have made gliding, braking, and stability easier for smaller animals? Sure, a little. But this is not the key to explaining why sauropods became walking apartment buildings. So, denser air is a fascinating ingredient in the mix, but it's not making 20-ton animals float. That's not how buoyancy works at these scales. Theory 3. Faster rotation, or the dizzy planet hypothesis. If Earth spins, the equator experiences a small outward effect from rotation, centrifugal acceleration. It slightly reduces effective weight at low latitudes. So here's the claim. If Earth rotated faster in the deep past, animals near the equator would feel slightly lighter. And if that lasted long enough, maybe evolution adapted to it. This sounds scientific because it is technically true that Earth's rotation has slowed over time. Tidal forces transfer angular momentum. Days were shorter in the deep past, so could the dinosaur world have been a high-speed spinning planet? Could that be the hidden explanation? No. Even today, rotation reduces effective gravity at the equator by only a tiny fraction. To get a meaningful reduction, you'd need Earth spinning so fast that the day length becomes absurdly short. And once you do that, you trigger other problems. The planet's shape changes, the equatorial bulge grows, the climate regime shifts. the dynamics of the Earth-Moon system change, and the geological evidence we have for the Mesozoic does not point to a wildly faster Earth with a radically different rotation state. Yes, days were shorter, but we're talking about maybe 22 or 23-hour days, not 8-hour days. The effect on gravity at the equator would be negligible, so faster rotation is real, shorter days are real. But as an explanation for dinosaur gigantism, it's a rounding error in the physics. Theory 4. The Moon was closer, or tides don't work that way. The Moon is slowly moving away from Earth. That's a fact. So it must have been closer in the past. And that leads people to wonder if the Moon's gravity somehow made Earth feel lighter. It doesn't. Here's why. The Moon's gravity does not cancel Earth's gravity. Most of the Moon's pull accelerates the whole Earth and everything on it together. What remains is the tidal differential, the gradient. That's what causes tides. And even if the Moon was closer in the Triassic, the change in that tidal effect would still be tiny compared to Earth's surface gravity. It might matter for ocean tides, it might matter for coastal ecology, but it does not make multi-ton animals feel like they're living on a low-gravity moon base. So the Moon is dramatic, the Moon is influential, but it's not a practical explanation for why the boomer dinosaurs became enormous. The problem with all of these theories. Notice the pattern? Every single one of these theories tries to change the rules of physics to make dinosaurs work. Lower gravity, thicker air, faster spin, closer moon. But dinosaurs didn't need the rules to change. They just needed to be really, really good at being dinosaurs. And that brings us to the theories that actually hold up. The ones based on biology, ecology, and evolution, the ones that explain how nature built giants without rewriting the laws of physics. Let's talk about what actually worked. The oxygen paradox, succeeding despite the odds. Here's where things get a little strange. You've probably heard that dinosaurs lived in a high oxygen world. That extra oxygen in the atmosphere let them grow huge, breathe easier, and dominate the planet. That story is everywhere, and it's wrong. Oxygen levels during the Mesozoic were not higher than today. They were lower, sometimes much lower. Let me say that again, because this is one of the most persistent myths in dinosaur science. For most of the age of dinosaurs, atmospheric oxygen was below modern levels, the Triassic and early Jurassic, around 15 to 16% oxygen. Today, 21%. The mid to late Jurassic, still low, often below 15%. Even during parts of the Cretaceous, oxygen levels appear to have been around 10 to 15% for extended periods. There's some debate about late Cretaceous oxygen levels. Some studies using amber samples suggest temporary spikes up to 25 or 30%. But this is contested, and even if true, it doesn't apply to the earlier periods when sauropods were already enormous. The high oxygen world people talk about? That was the Carboniferous period, over 300 million years ago, before the dinosaurs. That's when you get oxygen levels hitting 25 to 35%, and that's when you get giant dragonflies and massive arthropods. Insects breathe through diffusion. They benefit directly from high oxygen. Vertebrates? Not so much, and by the time dinosaurs showed up, that oxygen party was long over. So here's the paradox. Dinosaurs achieved their incredible sizes in an atmosphere with less oxygen than we have today. How? The answer is one of the coolest pieces of evolutionary engineering in the fossil record. Dinosaurs, and specifically the lineages that became giants, evolved an incredibly efficient respiratory system. They had air sacs. If you've ever looked at bird anatomy, you know birds don't breathe like mammals. Mammals inhale and exhale using the same path. Birds have a unidirectional airflow system. Air flows through the lungs in one direction constantly, even when the bird exhales. This makes oxygen extraction far more efficient. Dinosaurs had this system too. We know because we can see the anatomical signatures in their bones. Pneumatic cavities, air-filled spaces connected to the respiratory system. These weren't just weight-saving features, though they helped with that. They were part of a breathing system that let dinosaurs extract more oxygen from every breath than a mammal of the same size could manage. So the oxygen story isn't that dinosaurs lived in an oxygen-rich paradise. It's that they evolved to thrive in a low-oxygen world by building a better engine. That's way cooler than there was just more air. Greenhouse world, when plants go insane. If oxygen wasn't the magic bullet, what about food? This one actually holds up. The Mesozoic was warm, really warm. For much of the era, there were no permanent polar ice caps. Carbon dioxide levels were often elevated compared to today, sometimes several times higher. And when CO2 is up and temperatures are high, plant growth goes into overdrive. More plants mean more food. More food means herbivores can grow larger, and when herbivores grow larger, predators scale up to match them. But here's the nuance. Productivity alone doesn't solve biomechanics. Even with unlimited food, a land animal still has to carry its mass. It still has to pump blood uphill to its brain. It still has to regulate heat. It still has to survive injuries and reproduce. Also, the plant world of the Mesozoic was not a modern grassland paradise. It was conifers, cycads, ginkgos, ferns, and some genuinely strange ecosystems that don't have modern analogues. High biomass doesn't always equal easy calories. Sauropods were eating stuff that's hard to digest. They needed massive guts and constant intake just to keep the engine running. So, yes, a greenhouse world with abundant plant life helped. It's part of the equation, but it's not the whole story. You can't just feed an elephant until it turns into a sauropod. The biomechanics have to work. The temperature advantage, staying warm without trying. Here's a simpler one. Warm climates reduce heat loss problems. They reduce the metabolic cost of staying warm. They allow large bodies to function without constant thermal stress. Gigantothermy is the term. When you're big enough, you retain heat just from your mass. Your surface area to volume ratio drops, so you lose heat more slowly. Combine that with a warm climate, and you've got an animal that barely has to worry about getting cold. This is legitimately useful. Modern elephants struggle in cold climates. They're adapted for heat. Dinosaurs, especially the giants, would have benefited enormously from living in a world where winter meant slightly less hot, instead of everything freezes. But again, this explains how giants can maintain their size. It doesn't explain how they got there in the first place. Temperature helps, but it's not the prime mover. The real keys, biology and life history. So if physics didn't change and environmental factors only help at the margins, what actually explains dinosaur gigantism? The answer, as it turns out, is a combination of biological innovations and life history strategies that vertebrates had never quite put together before and haven't managed to repeat since. Let's break it down. Innovation 1. The air sac revolution. We already talked about this, but it's worth emphasizing. The respiratory system of sauropods and many other dinosaurs was fundamentally more efficient than what mammals have. Unidirectional airflow, constant oxygen extraction, high efficiency even at low atmospheric oxygen. This matters because breathing is expensive when you're huge. Your lungs are deep inside your body. Getting oxygen to your tissues requires moving a lot of air through a lot of plumbing. Sauropods solved this with a system that let them breathe effectively, even when oxygen was scarce. And as a bonus, those air sacs extended into the bones, making the skeleton lighter without sacrificing strength. Pneumatic bones? It's like nature invented airplane engineering 200 million years before the Wright brothers. Innovation? 2. No chewing allowed. Sauropods didn't chew. They cropped vegetation with their teeth and swallowed it whole. This sounds insane. How do you digest food without chewing it? The answer is, you have a massive fermentation chamber in your gut, a huge stomach where bacteria do the work. You eat constantly. You process volume, not efficiency. And because you don't chew, your head can be small. Small head means light neck. Light neck means you can have a long neck. Long neck means you can reach food other animals can't. Suddenly, being tall isn't just about competition. It's about accessing an entire vertical buffet that shorter herbivores can't touch. You can stand in one spot and clear out vegetation in a huge radius. You save energy. You grow. The no chewing strategy is bizarre, but it works if you commit to it fully. And sauropods committed. Innovation. 3. Reproduce like a reptile. Grow like a mammal. Here's where it gets really interesting. Sauropods laid eggs. Lots of eggs. Dozens per clutch, possibly multiple clutches per year. And crucially, they didn't stick around to raise the young. This is the opposite of mammal strategy. Mammals give live birth, produce relatively few young, and invest heavily in parental care. An elephant can only have one calf every few years, and then it has to spend years raising that calf to independence. That puts a hard limit on population growth. It also puts a hard limit on how many adults the ecosystem can support. If you're spending years feeding and protecting offspring, you're dedicating resources that could go toward growth. Sauropods, they laid eggs and left. The juveniles hatched and immediately had to fend for themselves. High mortality, yes, but the ones that survived grew fast. Actually, they grew really fast. Bone histology studies show that sauropods put on mass at rates comparable to large mammals, sometimes faster. They reached reproductive maturity relatively quickly, probably before reaching full adult size, and then they kept growing. This is the secret sauce. Grow fast early. Reproduce early enough to get your genes into the next generation. But don't stop growing. Just keep going. If you survive long enough, you become enormous, and the longer you live, the bigger you get, and the more likely your bones are to fossilize and get discovered millions of years later. The biomechanical package, but you can't just grow fast and get big. You need the structural engineering to make it work. Sauropods had column-like limbs, straight legs, minimal bending, weight transmitted straight down through the bones into the ground. This is the same strategy elephants use, and it's the only way to support massive weight on land. They also had, recent evidence suggests, sophisticated soft tissue pads in their feet, similar to elephants. These pads distributed weight and absorbed impact. Without them, the bones alone couldn't handle the stress. The neck was a balancing act, long but light. Pneumatic bones filled with air sacs, small head on the end. The whole structure counterbalanced by a muscular tail. Walk around with your neck extended, use your tail as a counterweight, and suddenly bipedalism isn't required. And then there's the cardiovascular challenge. How do you pump blood up a neck that's 10 meters long? The answer is probably a powerful 4-chambered heart, possibly with very high blood pressure. We can't fossilize blood pressure, but the physics demand it. Every piece of sauropod anatomy is optimized for one thing: making gigantism work. Not just possible, work. Efficiently enough that the animal can eat, move, reproduce, and survive. So why did it work for dinosaurs and not mammals? This is the really interesting question. If gigantism is just a matter of good engineering and favorable conditions, why didn't Cenozoic mammals produce anything close to sauropod sizes? Elephants are impressive. They're the largest land animals today. But a big bull elephant weighs maybe 6 or 7 tons. A large sauropod could weigh 50 to 70 tons or more. That's an order of magnitude difference. Part of the answer is reproduction. Mammals are locked into live birth and parental care. That puts a ceiling on how many resources adults can dedicate to their own growth. Part of the answer is competition. The Cenozoic had dense ecosystems with lots of large herbivores. Resource competition might have favored medium-sized specialists over massive generalists. Part of the answer is climate. The Cenozoic cooled. Grasslands replaced forests. The greenhouse conditions of the Mesozoic never quite returned. But part of the answer is probably also just historical contingency. Dinosaurs evolved the right combination of traits at the right time in the right environment. They hit the sweet spot. And once the non-avian dinosaurs went extinct, that particular combination of traits never reassembled. Evolution isn't trying to make giants, it's trying to make animals that survive and reproduce. Gigantism happened because, for sauropods, it worked. The boomer dinosaur problem. And now we finally get to the part that rewrites everything you might have thought about dinosaurs. Because here's the thing, when we talk about dinosaurs, when we picture them, when we build museum exhibits and write books, we are almost always talking about boomer dinosaurs. The adults, the giants, the grandpas and grandmas, the old veterans who lived long enough to reach maximum size. But what if the boomer dinosaurs are the wrong place to start? What if the key to understanding how dinosaurs worked isn't in the adults, but in the young? Let me explain what I mean. Think about Tyrannosaurus rex. When most people picture it, they picture the boomer dinosaur, the adult tyrant, huge skull, bone-crushing bite, tiny arms, a walking execution device. But T-Rex didn't start that way. It grew, it changed, its proportions shifted, its ecology shifted, its prey shifted, its role in the ecosystem shifted. Evidence suggests juvenile tyrannosaurs were proportionally different. They were leggier, more lightly built, more agile, faster. Juveniles could not compete with adults by brute force. They had to do something else. They had to run, they had to turn, they had to chase smaller prey. They had to survive in a world where the biggest predator might include their own parents. So instead of one dinosaur frozen in time, you have a moving target. You have a creature that changes shape and function across its life. And suddenly, those tiny arms don't need to make sense as adult hunting tools. Maybe they never were. Maybe the head and jaws were the primary weapon from the start, and the arms were already reduced. Or maybe they had secondary roles. Bracing, stabilizing, helping the animal rise from the ground, holding during mating, signaling, or even at younger sizes, more feathering for warmth and balance. The point is, we cannot understand T-Rex by only looking at the boomer stage. We have to understand its whole life history. And here's where this becomes the key that unlocks multiple puzzles at once. This doesn't only apply to T-Rex, it applies to the whole way we imagine dinosaurs. We are obsessed with boomer dinosaurs. We fill museums with boomer dinosaurs. We draw dinosaurs based on boomer dinosaurs. We reconstruct dinosaur behavior based on boomer dinosaur behavior. We talk about all dinosaur abilities based on boomer dinosaur abilities. But nature doesn't operate only at the grandparent stage. Evolution selects across the entire life cycle. Juveniles that survive become adults. Adults that reproduce create juveniles. So you can't understand a dinosaur by freezing it at the boomer stage. You have to understand its entire developmental arc. Now comes the surprising question. Could it be that many dinosaur traits that look absurd in boomer dinosaurs were perfectly sensible in juveniles? Could it be that feathering wing-like structures, tiny arms, and strange proportions were most meaningful at the small, young, early stages? Because if you shrink a dinosaur down to juvenile size, everything changes. Surface area to mass ratio changes, heat loss changes, agility changes, aerodynamics changes. Feathers become more useful, braking surfaces become more useful. Short-assisted hops become more plausible, running corrections become more plausible, balance aids become more plausible. What looks like a useless arm on a 10-ton boomer dinosaur could become a meaningful stabilizer on a 50-kilogram juvenile. And suddenly, the evolutionary path to wings doesn't require a low-gravity planet. It doesn't require a denser atmosphere. It doesn't require an extraordinary moon. It just requires something evolution already does constantly: life stages, transitional functionality, exaptation, traits that begin serving one purpose and later get co-opted for another. Think about the abelisaurids. Carnotaurus, Majungasaurus, famous for tiny arms, even more reduced than T-Rex. Are we looking at a boomer dinosaur snapshot? What did juveniles look like? Did juvenile abelisaurids have relatively larger forelimbs? Did they use them differently? Did their body proportions shift with age? If we could build a complete growth series, would our interpretation change? Look at other lineages. Look at Meraxes, a big predator with reduced arms. Convergence. Multiple lineages arrive at the same outcome. What does that imply? It implies that for giant predators, arms can be reduced if the skull dominates, but it doesn't imply that arms were always useless at every life stage. It implies a trajectory, a path, a life history that changes over time. And suddenly, the problem of why are dinosaurs so big begins to transform. Because we stop imagining gigantism as one event, one switch, one environmental cheat code. Instead, we imagine it as something far more natural, a world where dinosaurs grew fast, where they matured early enough to reproduce, where juvenile stages were active ecological players occupying different niches than the adults, and where adults continued to grow long after reaching reproductive maturity. In other words, dinosaurs may have been big because dinosaurs were built for growth. Their entire life history strategy was optimized for reaching large size quickly, reproducing before maxing out, and then continuing to grow if they survived. And here's where boomer dinosaur becomes more than a joke. Boomer dinosaurs might represent the natural outcome of a life history strategy that favors the survivors. Grow fast early. Reproduce early enough. Survive long enough. Keep growing. And if you survive long enough, you become enormous. Your skeleton becomes harder to ignore, harder to destroy, harder to miss in the fossil record, and far more likely to be fossilized and discovered. So the fossil record becomes dominated by boomer dinosaurs, not because all dinosaurs were always gigantic, but because the ones that lasted longest became the most visible in time. This is a taphonomic bias, a preservation bias. We're sampling the end of the life history, not the whole story. The psychological shift. This theory also solves something else, the "this makes no sense" feeling that many people have when they look at certain dinosaur features. Because a lot of the features that seem absurd in boomer dinosaurs become much less absurd if you picture the younger animal. Feathering makes more sense as insulation and display at smaller sizes. Wing-like surfaces make more sense as stabilizers when you're light and fast. The idea of a dinosaur doing short-assisted hops like a chicken becomes more plausible when the dinosaur weighs 30 kilograms instead of 3 tons. So the boomer dinosaur theory is not a claim that a grandparent T-Rex could fly. That would be ridiculous. It's the claim that we are asking the wrong question. We keep asking, how did a 10-ton monster operate? When we should also be asking, how did it operate when it was 100 kilograms, when it was 30 kilograms, when it was a fast-moving, feathered juvenile trying not to get eaten by literally everything, including maybe its own species? Because if you take that seriously, then dinosaurs start to look less like broken biology and more like a long developmental story. A story of shifting niches, a story of shifting performance envelopes, a story of creatures that changed roles as they grew, and that, in turn, can help explain why so many dinosaur lineages reached extreme adult sizes. Because gigantism might not need a planetary mystery, it might only need time and survival. If you keep growing, you become the boomer dinosaur. And if you become the boomer dinosaur, you become the dinosaur everyone finds. Everyone studies, everyone draws, everyone builds theories around. And that creates the illusion that dinosaur life was built around the giant adult form. But what if the giant adult form was only the last chapter? What if the dinosaur era was full of animals whose most interesting evolutionary decisions happened earlier, when they were smaller, faster, more experimental, more flexible, more feathered, more likely to use their forelimbs for things we don't associate with the adult giants? The real explanation for gigantism. So, if we pull all of this together, what's the actual explanation for why dinosaurs were so big? It's not one thing, it's a package deal. Multiple factors working together in a way that hasn't been repeated since. 1. Efficient respiratory systems that worked even in low-oxygen environments. Air sacs, unidirectional breathing, high extraction efficiency. 2. A warm, greenhouse world with abundant plant life and stable climate conditions that favored large herbivores. 3. A reproductive strategy that allowed rapid population growth without the constraints of parental care. Lay many eggs, let the juveniles fend for themselves, invest energy in continued growth. 4. Rapid growth rates documented in bone histology. Sauropods grew fast, reached reproductive maturity relatively early, then kept growing throughout life. 5. Biomechanical innovations, pneumatic bones, column-like limbs, soft tissue foot pads, long necks balanced by muscular tails, small heads that didn't require chewing. 6. Ontogenetic niche partitioning. Juveniles and adults occupied different ecological roles, reducing competition and allowing a wider range of body sizes to coexist. And 7. A taphonomic bias that makes us think gigantism was more universal than it actually was. The biggest, oldest individuals were the most likely to fossilize. We're seeing the survivors, not the population. None of these factors required physics to change. They just required evolution to stumble onto a winning combination. And once it did, the result was the largest land animals that have ever existed. So what happened? If this strategy worked so well, why don't we have giant sauropods today? The short answer is the asteroid. The end Cretaceous extinction event killed off all the non-avian dinosaurs. The big ones went extinct. The small feathered ones, the birds, survived. But the longer answer is that even if the extinction hadn't happened, the Cenozoic world was different. Cooler, drier, more seasonal. Grasslands replaced forests. Ecosystems became more fragmented. Mammals radiated into the empty niches, but they were constrained by their reproductive biology. Live birth, parental care, longer generation times. These are great strategies for some environments, but they put a ceiling on maximum size. Birds, the surviving dinosaurs, went in a different direction. They got smaller, not larger. Flight favored miniaturization, and while some large flightless birds evolved, They never approached sauropod sizes. The unique combination of traits that made sauropod gigantism possible hasn't reassembled. Maybe it never will. When someone asks, why were dinosaurs so big? The best answer isn't a single cosmic secret. It's not gravity, it's not oxygen, it's not a closer moon or a denser atmosphere or a planet that expanded like a balloon. The best answer is this. Dinosaurs were big because they had a life history strategy that produced big animals when conditions were right. They grew fast. They reproduced without the burden of extended parental care. They had respiratory and biomechanical systems that made large size viable, and they lived in a world that rewarded size with access to food, protection from predators, and reproductive success. And we keep studying dinosaurs like they were frozen statues. But dinosaurs were not statues. They were growing, they were changing, they moved through life stages just like every other animal. The boomer dinosaurs we obsess over were only the final form of a much larger story. And if we want to understand how dinosaurs actually worked, we need to stop staring at museum skeletons and start thinking about the whole animal, from hatchling to juvenile to adult, from fast-growing youngster to massive old-timer, from agile predator to bone-crushing titan, from feathered runner to scale-covered giant. That's the real story of dinosaur gigantism. Not a planet that broke the rules, just animals that played the game really, really well. And the next time you see a giant adult T-Rex with tiny arms, instead of asking, how did this ever make sense, you might ask a different question. What did it look like when it was 2 years old? And what could it do then that the boomer dinosaur could never do again? Because that might be the real beginning of the answer, and it might be the true key to understanding why dinosaurs ruled the Earth for over 160 million years. Not by changing the rules, by mastering the game. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the science of dinosaur gigantism, hit that like button and subscribe. We've got more videos coming on dinosaur biomechanics, evolutionary history, and all the weird ways nature builds impossible animals. And if you've got theories or questions about dinosaurs, drop them in the comments. Let's talk about extinct monsters. Until next time, remember, the dinosaurs weren't magic. They were just really, really good at being dinosaurs. See you in the next one.